You see them walking through school hallways surrounded by people, constantly laughing, constantly invited somewhere, constantly visible. Online, their photos collect attention effortlessly. Their names move through conversations naturally, and from a distance, it seems obvious that they must be happy. And maybe at some point, you started believing that if you could just become more liked, more admired, more noticed, then something inside you would finally feel complete too. Because when you are young, popularity does not just look attractive, it looks like proof. Proof that you matter. Proof that people value you. Proof that you are interesting enough, attractive enough, important enough to be seen. And in a world where so many people quietly struggle with insecurity and loneliness, being popular starts to feel less like a social advantage and more like emotional survival. But one of the strangest realizations many people experience as they grow older is discovering that attention and happiness are not the same thing at all. A lot of teenagers and young adults spend years chasing visibility without realizing what they're actually searching for underneath it. They think they want popularity, but often what they truly want is acceptance, belonging, validation, or emotional safety. Popularity simply becomes the symbol their brain attaches to those deeper emotional needs. This is why the desire to be liked can become so emotionally intense during adolescence and early adulthood. Human beings are naturally social creatures, but during teenage years especially, the brain becomes highly sensitive to social feedback. Acceptance from peers feels psychologically important because, from an evolutionary perspective, belonging to a group once directly affected survival. Even today, the brain still reacts to exclusion as if it carries real danger. Social media intensifies this instinct dramatically. For the first time in human history, social status has become constantly measurable. Followers, likes, comments, views, shares, streaks, group photos, invitations, and public interactions create a system where people can compare their social value numerically every single day. As a result, many young people begin unconsciously treating attention as evidence of worth. And once that association forms, popularity starts feeling emotionally addictive. Every notification becomes a tiny moment of reassurance. Every compliment becomes temporary relief from insecurity. Every increase in attention creates a brief sense of significance. But because external validation is unstable by nature, the emotional satisfaction it creates also fades quickly. The brain adapts fast. What once felt exciting eventually becomes normal, which creates the need for more attention to maintain the same emotional feeling. This is one reason why some of the most publicly admired people still feel deeply unhappy privately. External admiration cannot permanently stabilize internal insecurity. It can distract from it temporarily, but eventually the mind returns to the same unresolved questions underneath everything. Am I enough when nobody is looking at me? Do people actually know me, or only the version I perform for them? Would I still feel valuable if the attention disappeared? These questions become especially painful because popularity often encourages performance rather than authenticity. The more socially rewarded a certain version of yourself becomes, the harder it feels to stop maintaining it. People begin carefully managing their image, personality, humor, opinions, appearance, and behavior around what receives approval. Slowly, they stop expressing themselves naturally and start expressing themselves strategically, and over time, that creates emotional exhaustion. Many people assume popular individuals feel confident because they receive constant validation, but external attention often increases anxiety rather than removing it. When your sense of worth depends heavily on how others perceive you, every interaction starts carrying emotional weight. You become hyper-aware of how you are being judged. You fear rejection more intensely because there is more status to lose. You begin monitoring yourself constantly. The problem is that human beings cannot relax psychologically while always performing. What makes this even more complicated is that modern culture continuously reinforces the idea that visibility equals success. The most admired people online are usually the most watched people. Influence, attention, and recognition are treated as proof that someone's life matters more. As a result, many young people unconsciously begin building their identity around being perceived rather than being understood. But being seen by many people is not the same as feeling known by someone. This is where many people go wrong. Instead of asking themselves what kind of relationships or life experiences genuinely create fulfillment, they focus entirely on becoming more socially desirable. They chase status instead of connection, image instead of identity, recognition instead of meaning. And because popularity appears glamorous from a distance, people often assume it will solve emotional discomfort automatically. They imagine that once enough people admire them, insecurity will disappear naturally, loneliness will disappear naturally, self-doubt will disappear naturally, but emotional struggles rarely disappear simply because more people are watching you. In some cases, they become harder to escape because public approval creates pressure to maintain the version of yourself people expect. This is why so many individuals who appear socially successful still describe feeling emotionally isolated. They are surrounded by attention, but not necessarily by honesty, admired, but not deeply understood. The real shift begins when a person starts separating self-worth from visibility, because happiness was never meant to come from constantly being perceived by others. Human beings are psychologically healthier when they feel internally grounded rather than externally validated. That does not mean friendships, admiration, or social connection are meaningless. They matter deeply, but they cannot become the entire foundation of identity without creating emotional instability. There is a quieter kind of confidence that develops when you stop organizing your life around being impressive. You become less concerned with whether every person likes you, and more concerned with whether your relationships feel genuine. You stop asking how to attract attention constantly, and start asking whether the attention you receive actually aligns with who you are, honestly. This changes your priorities in subtle ways. You become more selective about whose opinions emotionally affect you. You stop interpreting every moment of exclusion as proof that you are failing socially. You realize that being widely liked sometimes requires sacrificing parts of yourself continuously, and eventually you begin questioning whether that trait is worth it. You also begin understanding that some of the happiest people are not necessarily the most admired people. Often they are simply people who feel emotionally safe enough to exist naturally. People who have relationships where performance is unnecessary. People whose identity is built on something more stable than public approval. And perhaps most importantly, you stop expecting popularity to answer emotional questions it was never designed to answer. Because no amount of attention can fully resolve a lack of self-understanding. No number of followers can permanently remove insecurity. No social status can replace the feeling of genuinely knowing yourself outside of how others react to you. A practical way to begin shifting away from this mindset is by paying attention to how much of your behavior is shaped by perception. Notice how often you think about how things look instead of how they feel. Notice how often you seek validation before trusting your own preferences, opinions, or identity. Notice how much emotional power you give to being included, noticed, or approved of. At the same time, spend more time building parts of your life that exist outside public performance. Interests that are not optimized for attention. Conversations where honesty matters more than appearing impressive. Moments where you are not trying to be perceived a certain way constantly. Because the more your identity depends entirely on external attention, the more fragile your emotional state becomes. And maybe one of the most important realizations a person can have while growing up is understanding that popularity was never really the thing they were searching for in the first place. What most people truly want is connection, peace, acceptance, and the freedom to exist without constantly proving their value to the world around them. And those things are often found much more quietly than people expect.